Sonic has had many rivals in the past that contrast him in various different ways, but the robotic duplicate Metal Sonic is the only one whose comparison is so clear and direct. While he's definitely cemented himself in the history of the franchise, alongside his fantastic design, making this video has made me realize his game appearances haven't been all that great. Either because he's just a small piece of the story, or he's given the spotlight in some subpar entries. I think he's still lacking a truly definitive game to call his own, though I do know his character's been elevated in the eyes of some fans due to his roles in various arcs in the comics, which I'll save for a future video. Introduced early in the series in Sonic CD for the Sega CD, which began development before Sonic 2 was released, Metal Sonic was showcased front and center on the covers of both the Japanese and Western versions of the game. His place in the story is quite simple. Robotnik has taken over a place called Little Planet, and begun converting it into a floating stronghold, similar to his scheme with the Death Egg. Metal Sonic is one of his latest creations, and he lets him loose on the planet to help distract the real Sonic from stopping his plans. Amy Rose follows Sonic here since she's in love with him, but ends up getting kidnapped by Metal Sonic, who uses her as bait to divert our hero's attention. He's designed to mimic Sonic's appearance and abilities, sporting a darker blue color scheme, red shoes, and a rocket thruster in his chest in place of the lighter skin tone the real Sonic has there. This rocket lets him fly at super speeds, so he doesn't actually run to achieve his speed, but floats through the air as his thin legs hang down in a cool but slightly creepy way. He's very angular with sharp fingers and a pointy nose. The whites of Sonic's eyes are inverted to pitch black on metal, which allows his glowing red eyes to stand out, immediately making it clear he's a hostile threat. He copies Sonic's personality to some degree as well, wagging his finger at you in a taunting manner, similar to how Sonic would on the title screen of the first game. Of course, he wants to race you to see who really is the fastest, dissatisfied with being compared to someone so beneath him. So the two of you take off as fast as you can towards the exit of Stardust Speedway, while Robotnik follows behind with a powerful laser that will insta-kill you. The goal isn't to hurt him since he doesn't take damage, but you're gonna want to stay ahead of him or avoid touching him, since he'll often cover himself in electricity to damage you as he flies by. If you succeed, you shut the door on him and watch him slam into the wall, smashing into pieces as the pale imitation of the original he is. Sonic then goes on to save Amy and Little Planet by preventing a bad future, either through collecting the time stones through the game's special stages or by destroying all of the robot transporters located in the past variants of each act. Alongside them, you can find these projectors shining the image of Metal Sonic stepping on an animal, likely inflicting massive psychological damage to the local wildlife population and making them easier to conquer. Destroying this projector will cause more animals to appear throughout the zone, since you ended their torment for now. The credit sequence has this awesome recreation of Sonic's race against Metal, showcasing the scale these artists really envisioned for their encounter, which obviously had to be translated into what was possible on the technology of the time. So he exploded in CD's story, but of course a robot this cool looking could never stay dead, and he reappeared in a bunch of spin-offs, including Triple Trouble for the Game Gear. He knocks you off your rocket shoes and has a boss fight with you right before your final encounter with Robotnik. It's not a hard fight, since he's most vulnerable as he repeatedly swoops down to attack you. In a much more casual outing, he appeared as one of the racers in Sonic Drift 2. And while we're at it, I'm not gonna mention every kart racing and sports game he appears in, because they're not too noteworthy in my mind, and if you're trying to fill out a roster, why wouldn't you throw Metal Sonic in there for the aesthetics? After CD, he made a more significant appearance in Knuckles Chaotix for the 32X, where the first thing you see is him flying right at the camera in 32-bit glory. You free one of your buddies from a capsule, and Metal flies in and grabs Robotnik, moving him in and away from the camera like, "Whoa, check out this new effect, kids!" Apparently they're working together to capture the 6 Chaos Rings, so they can achieve some kind of unspecified evil goal. I'm sure you've heard a million times already how trippy this game is, and I don't have much to add there. All I'll say is I kinda prefer this version of characterization for Vector the crocodile. He's all thin and tube-shaped, turning into a wheel when he jumps and listening to his tunes. He's just a rad guy with a swaggy walk animation that leads into his run where he's either saluting the camera or holding onto his headphones so they don't fly off. Anyway, Metal Sonic doesn't do anything else until you've completed all of the game's stages, where he then shows up to attach himself to the level select machine and starts using it to attack you. You have to hit this bumper in the middle and get the flashing screens below to stop on the one marked with an X to do damage to him. The whole thing starts falling apart the more successful hits you land, with Metal eventually flopping to Robotnik's feet rather sadly. Eggman accesses one of these giant rings, which is apparently a corrupted dark ring created from the Chaos Rings, whatever that means, and jumps inside it. Metal then flies in after him and we immediately cut to a boss fight against a giant red demonic looking Metal Sonic. This form is known as Metal Sonic Kai, which used to scare the hell out of me as a kid when I'd see its sprites online and couldn't conceive of where this thing came from. Everything I read about this form just states he was imbued with dark energy from the ring and turned into this. But doesn't it seem like Robotnik was planning something else with the ring and Metal Sonic flew in unexpectedly? Just watching the scene alone makes it seem like they had a malfunction similar to the teleporter in The Fly, and this robot is the result of the evil energy of both combining together. This would explain why he has Robotnik's red, yellow, and black color scheme. Who knows, since we get no closure after beating him and the game just ends. When it comes to other spin-offs, it was cool to see him as a playable racer in Sonic R who can float over water. He isn't playable in Sonic the Fighters, but he is the penultimate boss. His most powerful move is to lift you up into the air and just drop your ass, which is the greatest tactic anyone with flight could ever use. His design works in these early 3D, low-poly art styles pretty well. If you want something that actually captures the feeling of that brief piece of animation we saw of Metal racing Sonic from CD, you'll have to check out the 2-episode Sonic OVA from 1996. I've always loved the art style of this thing, and wouldn't mind if its version of Sonic's world was used for the games. The story focuses on its own version of Metal Sonic's creation and introduction, with the opening being a bunch of detailed shots of his various pieces. Robotnik pretends to be a good guy and baits Sonic and his friends into heading into his base to stop a reactor from exploding. Really, it's a ploy to scan Sonic's biometrics so they could be transferred to Metal and make him a perfect doppelganger. To me, this OVA is his best moment in the series, showcasing a ton of his abilities through some creative choreography. He goes around destroying the cities that make up Sonic's land in the sky, with the goal of collapsing it all into the ruined planet below. So he's a real force to be reckoned with. And since he's made from Sonic's mind, the two of them have a bunch of the same mannerisms. Sonic can even understand his taunts even though he's just making beeps and squeaks. The idea is that they're an equal match because they both know exactly what the other is thinking. The only difference is that no matter how much of a beating Metal takes, he just doesn't go down. Tails manages to make him malfunction by exaggerating Sonic's personality within his programming, which actually causes him to save a few civilians in trouble. In the end, he falls into the lava he released earlier and starts melting. But now that Sonic's seen the good in him and realizes he's just a product of his coding, he actually tries to save him. But just like Sonic himself thinks he's the best and the only one of his kind, Metal slaps his hand away, choosing death and proclaiming that there can only be one Sonic. It's a strangely bittersweet end to his character, but it just adds to how much of a great self-contained package this OVA is. So, Metal Sonic had to write off the prestige of being in CD and the OVA for years. His attempts to capture Amy are referenced in a flashback cutscene in Sonic Adventure 1, and you can even see his model hibernating inside Robotnik's secret base within the Mystic Ruins. He's playable in the butchered Sonic Adventure DX port for GameCube, but you need to collect all 130 emblems in the game, and that's too tall an order for what's essentially just a palette swap for Sonic. He could also be unlocked in the multiplayer for Sonic Adventure 2, where he reuses a lot of Shadow's animations, but he was there from the start in the Sonic Adventure 2 Battle port once again for GameCube. They gave him a few unique animations, and he has this cool prism shield he can use to negate incoming damage. It wasn't until Sonic Heroes from 2003 that they finally brought him back in a significant way. This was the first major Sonic game Sega developed for all of the other consoles that generation. And because they knew they'd be reaching a whole new audience, they wanted to simplify things and take the game back to a more lighthearted tone compared to the adventure games. To that end, they decided to go with Metal Sonic as the game's main antagonist, since his goals are far more direct and digestible. He captures Robotnik and takes over his fleet of aerial battleships and all of the robots contained within it. He then pretends to be Robotnik himself, baiting Sonic and his friends to come stop him before he launches an attempt to take over the world. In actuality, he's testing them to obtain their combat data so he can become even stronger and finally beat Sonic. And since all 4 teams of characters play through the same stages in the same order, he ends up getting combat data on the others too. I guess it makes sense for Metal to return alongside the Chaotix, since they do have some history together, even though I'm pretty sure the game's director, Takashi Iizuka, considers this rendition of the group to be a rebooted version of them. Along the way, Metal kidnaps a Chow named Chocola and Big the Cat's pet, Froggy, which lets him copy the data of Chaos from Adventure 1. This is because Chows are connected to Chaos somehow, and Froggy ate his tail in Adventure. So even though that was returned at the end of the game, he still has some of his water DNA in him. So the Robotnik you're fighting throughout the game is really Metal Sonic in disguise, using his newfound ability to shapeshift like he's made of liquid metal. Robotnik was either in the process of upgrading him when he was betrayed, or Metal upgraded himself. Either way, he now goes by Neo Metal Sonic and has a significantly different design. I've never been a fan of this look, since he comes off as a wizard for no reason, with the loose-fitting cuffs and the way his quills almost stick straight up. Then you have the pointy shoulders and legs that look like bell-bottom jeans with sharp knee pads. The cherry on top is the studded belt and loincloth combo, which I could have sworn was a cape for the longest time. Needless to say, I don't think this design comes close to his original look, which didn't need to overcomplicate things. Outside of these moments where he copies your data at the end of the Bullet Station boss fight, there's not much foreshadowing to him being the main villain, other than this one moment in the level Hang Castle where you flip the environment upside down, and see a statue in his shape, which you shouldn't recognize until you replay the game since his full design isn't revealed until the final act. It's worth noting he now just openly talks in a synthetic voice, when he was previously silent, outside of that one final impactful moment at the end of the OVA. I do think I prefer his original quiet demeanor, because it felt like he wasn't amused at all by Sonic and only wanted to prove his superiority through his actions. But at the same time, this dynamic worked well with Robotnik, because he was the more eccentric one in control who communicated for his creation. Now that he's betrayed Robotnik and he's the main villain, he kinda needs to be able to communicate his motivations, which seems to be subjugating all organic life. Kind of a generic goal for an evil robot, but hey, it's Sonic Heroes. Once everyone meets up at the end, he puts his research to good use, likely channeling perfect chaos to transform himself into a similarly reptilian bestial form known as Metal Madness. Now, I actually think this design is pretty cool, even though I feel like it kinda just comes out of nowhere. He's finished off pretty quickly too, since everyone teams up to take him down, with them all whipping out Chaos Emeralds so Sonic can go super. The other 3 teams take turns damaging his different weak points while he shoots out fire and ice attacks, which is nothing truly unique. Eventually, he sprouts wings and flies off, leaving it up to Sonic's team to finish him off in a new form named Metal Overlord. He reiterates his belief that Sonic is actually his copy, and the only way he could think to beat him was to take his evolution into his own hands. As a setup, this final boss is pretty simple compared to the environments seen in the last 2 games, though it's pretty sick how he throws entire battleships at you, and I've got to admit his boss theme is pretty good. After he's defeated, he reverts all the way back to his original design, still unable to grasp why he isn't able to win when fulfilling his mission to destroy Sonic is all he's ever wanted. It's as simple as that, with this being the closest he ever got to getting the spotlight all to himself in the games. And even then, it's not the greatest. I guess it's kinda quaint looking at him compared to the less straightforward final bosses surrounding him, with the lore-heavy entities like Chaos and the Bio-Lizard to his left, and the same to his right with Black Doom and Solaris. Metal Overlord reappears as a boss fight in Shadow Generations as part of that game's scrambled timeline storyline. Along with several other bosses featured here, I feel like this capitalizes on the potential of the fight better than the game they're actually from. Like really, what did copying everyone's combat data get him in Heroes? I even forgot he gained the power of Chaos Control in the original fight because it doesn't help him accomplish anything. Meanwhile here, he can actually negate Shadow's time-stopping Chaos Control since he's already copied that ability, which is such an awesome surprise for the player, which keeps you on your toes. It's also an unexplored dynamic, these two creations of the Robotnik lineage, one bioengineered and the other born from steel, but both resenting the idea that they're fake hedgehogs and battling against Sonic for legitimacy. Metal has the opposite of imposter syndrome, so if he sees someone claiming to be the greatest, he wants to take that title, and that extends beyond his obsession to be the fastest thing alive. Now he even claims Shadow's title, declaring himself to be the ultimate lifeform with his newfound power. I know a lot of people didn't like how you're doom surfing the entire fight, but I think having it take place through this oil rig in the middle of the ocean is really cool, especially when he creates a whirlpool and it starts raining as a result. Similar to the original fight, he'll pull a submarine out of the water, and you need to blast it out of the sky. It's a little lame that you just reflect things into him the entire fight, but it's still much more interesting as a one-on-one fight with a guy who isn't in a super form. It's worth mentioning he's in the original generations as well, and for the next few appearances I'm gonna mention, we're dealing with Sonic CD callbacks. He's one of the rival fights that pop up throughout the game with no real rhyme or reason. He wants to challenge you for a Chaos Emerald needed to unlock the final boss, and we get a 2.5D take on the race you had with him in CD. This time it's an auto runner where he tries to hit you with various electrical attacks, along with launching objects at you from the environment. It's really easy, so nothing crazy here, but at least he got something. I feel like they made his design a bit more cutesy with a bigger head to really drive home the fact that he's meant to be the version from the classic era. There's a much more literal callback to CD in Sonic the Hedgehog 4. Remember that game? You'd get a small cutscene at the end of the game if you got all of the Chaos Emeralds in Episode 1, hinting at his involvement in the next one. If you owned both Episode 1 and 2, you could play through Episode Metal, which had Metal Sonic going through the levels of Episode 1. They show that after he got defeated in CD, he just laid there broken down until the events of Sonic 4, where Robotnik finally decides to revive him. So he flew back from Little Planet, got fixed up, and returned to hunting down Sonic. There's really nothing of substance here, he just grabs a gem that powers him up and then he takes a rocket to Episode 2, where he hops off to start a boss fight at the end of that game's second zone. It's basically another throwback to his fight in CD, except this time you can jump back and forth between two roller coaster tracks in the background and foreground. He keeps glowing purple from that gem he collected in Episode 1, and I think it's legitimately never explained why this is supposed to make him some kind of force to be reckoned with. He pops up again during a Sky Chase style flying section, where he pilots a ship that shoots rockets at you, but escapes before he's destroyed alongside his ride. His last appearance is during the final level when you make it up to the Death Egg Mark II, which was built around Little Planet. You fight him alongside Robotnik this time, where only he can be damaged while Robotnik acts as a barrier in your way. It's nice to see them actually work together, and he can even summon giant energy balls to drop on you. But it's a standard affair otherwise. What's even more standard is the race you have against him right after, which is just a bootleg version of the same concept from CD. The aesthetic isn't nearly as dramatic. There are signposts continuously telling you the distance of the goal, making it less tense, and you're rolling around as a ball with tails, making it feel like less of a face-off between rivals. And yeah, he slams into the wall once again, accomplishing nothing. Kinda sums up Sonic 4 in general, since they just gave up on this episodic project prematurely and never made a third one. Will we ever discover the true nature behind his magic purple aura? Of course not, but at least we got Mania, which handled his character much better. This is another game with time and space manipulation as part of its story, so you're taken back to one of the levels from CD. You come across one of those metal Sonic projectors scaring the animals, but they're quickly scared by the real deal who comes down to attack you as you try to make it through the next area. You make it to this machine that looks like the one used to copy Sonic's data from the OVA, and he attaches to it at the top in the same way he did with the machine in Chaotix. Maybe this was the lab he was created in, since there seemed to be other versions of him in the surrounding tubes, similar to the ones we saw containing him in Sonic Adventure. Strangely, all this machine does is send out little versions of Mecha Sonic from the 8-bit version of Sonic 2. You need to ricochet them off the walls back into him to deal damage, which is something new. For his final phase, it's once again similar to your race against him from the original CD, except there's a giant wall of spikes constantly chasing you, and he just tries to hurt you instead of beating you to a goal. You simply do damage to him at the right times to defeat him. But they must have thought this was anticlimactic, because in the re-release of the game, Mania Plus, they cut out this second half of his encounter and replaced it with something new. Now, Robotnik tosses him the Phantom Ruby, a powerful gem of vague origins, which transforms him into a giant robot very similar to the one from the end of Chaotix. This time he's actually blue, which might lend credence to my theory of Robotnik actually fusing with him to form the original red version. This version chases you down, destroying the path behind you in a way very reminiscent of the Death Egg robot from the end of Sonic 3 and Knuckles. You have to hit his chest at the right time when his spiky hand isn't in the way, which is a pretty good challenge. But in the end, he's thoroughly defeated, shattering into red shards. It wasn't until recording gameplay for this video that I realized they actually patched the original version of the fight out of the base game, meaning the only way I could play it was forcing Steam to download an earlier version of the game through console commands. Unless I'm missing something, it seems really weird not to give players the option to choose which version they want to play in the menu somewhere. I thought this was Sonic Mania Plus, not Mania Plus and Minus. But that aside, I'd say this new fight is a pretty great high point to end this video on, which kinda brings things full circle to his first couple major appearances in the 90s. Unfortunately, there is also Sonic Forces, where he's one of the returning minor antagonists. There's a new villain named Infinite who uses the power of that previously mentioned Phantom Ruby to create clones of older villains like Metal Sonic. So technically, this version of him isn't even real, making him a double fake Sonic and triple fake because he's already a video game character. All he does is have another one of these generic boost-style boss fights, where he hovers out of reach as you dodge his various lasers, until you can homing attack him repeatedly. For some reason, it feels like he gets bigger and bigger as the fight goes on, which just makes him a bigger target. He explodes into a bunch of cubes, and even though Infinite could make infinite clones of Metal Sonic if he wanted to, he chooses not to, and instead decides to become a reskinned version of this same Metal Sonic fight for your final fight with him, which is just pathetic. Well hey, won't totally hold this against Metal since it wasn't really him, just an illusion. Wrapping things up, overall Metal Sonic has a killer design and you can really sense his hatred for his opposite. I just don't think he's been in that many great games, so most of the times he's featured with any real prominence, they fail to take advantage of him or his appeal. But you could probably credit him with ushering in all of the robot clones and duplicates we've seen throughout the series, which are a big part of the identity of the series, and a lot of them have great designs of their own too. I don't think they need to try to overcomplicate his goals or give him some kind of sympathetic motivation to make him interesting. There's potential in his setup in Heroes, but that idea needed more time to breathe and better writing in general. At the same time, I think we've done enough callbacks to his race from CD by this point, so I'm not interested in another homage to that classic moment. The more he's brought back and easily defeated, the less weight his appearances are gonna hold, and the less intimidating he's gonna be as a rival. Maybe it's time to give him a rest if he's just gonna be a one-trick pony, unless they can actually find a way to make that race idea work in 3D to give it a new feel. Let me know if you want to see me take a look at his adaptations in the various comics, but until then, we'll just have to wait until his next appearance, because as long as there's still a Sonic, there will always be a Metal Sonic nipping at his heels and aiming for first place.